Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone out there. We are live once again. I'm extremely excited for our next guest because we're going through uncertain times, and who better to have on the show than a forward-thinking future thought leader. We have the one and only Gary Bolles. He served as a strategic consultant and consulting producer for the likes of Google, Yahoo, TED, the UN, New Zealand government, L'Oreal, Red Bull, London Business School, the list goes on. So it's my pleasure to welcome him to the stage. How are you, Gary?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
No worries. How's the brain? I know it's crazy time.
No better or worse than usual. Well, my wife might say a little worse, but otherwise doing fine. So
that's the one. For those people out there who may not know about you, can you just give the quick five of your background,
Sure.
What you're all about, and how you came to be here?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I have three hats, which I spin constantly. I'm the chair for the future of work with Singularity University, which is a global think tank and learning platform based here in San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley. I've got a consulting company called Charrette, where we dive into a variety of different projects, everything from advising the heads of labor and education for countries like Brazil and Chile, to doing workshops for refugee youth in Amman, Jordan. And we actually did a workshop for our adopted tribe, the Ngati Ruanui Iwi in Haura last year as well. And so, or a year and a half ago. And so we've got the opportunity with my company Charrette to be able to really sort of get our hands on helping people with a variety of different challenges. And then we've got a small software company that's built from a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which is sort of the world's career manual. So
yeah, I've read it.
Good for you. I hope you did some of the exercises too. So
yeah, absolutely.
Good.
It's very useful for those of you who haven't read it.
Great. So it's sort of one of the big issues that we're dealing with through our work with Singularity University, especially how do exponential technologies and everything from artificial intelligence to next generation medicine affect the worlds of work and learning and organizations. And then projects with, I've done, I think at 1.2 years ago, I did 13 lectures in 11 days in New Zealand. And it's one of our favorite countries to visit, and then sort of helping people with individual career choices. And so that gives us a broad canvas of all the different range of issues related to the future of work.
Excellent. And just before we get into the crunchy stuff, whereabouts are you at the moment in the States?
Oh, I'm in San Francisco, right smack in the middle of right now a pretty significant lockdown. We're treating it as a little bit more of a lockdown, more like your stage one, but a little bit. We're turning the lights on a little bit in a couple different places.
Okay, so like our level 4, level 3.
Sorry, I've got them flipped. Yeah, so we call it level 1. So yes, opposite. So yes, much earlier on, much less social gathering. But people are behaving reasonably well.
Excellent. We just got the news from our Prime Minister yesterday that we can jump down to level 2 later in the week. So that's exciting. We can go cafes, no massive events, but gatherings of up to 100 people outdoors, and we can go cafes up to 10 people. So pretty exciting that we can start getting life rocking and rolling. Obviously, the worldwide situation has changed, and this whole situation we've found ourselves in is pretty incredible. Do you think we've changed the trajectory of how we're going to function as society forever, or we'll go back to old habits and we'll just we're people who like to know what we know, so that we might revert back to what was happening 6 months ago?
So that's a good question, Jase. It's such a big, complicated sets of issues for different societies and different economies. So, but I try to sort of simplify it down to helping people sort of think about, okay, what do we lose and what do we gain at these big inflection points? And we've had big inflection points before. We've had wars, we've had viruses in the past, we've had famines, we've had really big, we've had global recessions, big weighty events that have affected us. And there are things that we lose in those transitions, and there are things that we gain. And so I think it's very important to mourn what we lose, especially if there are things that we wish we still had, but it's also important to embrace what we gain. And then obviously there's a lot of people asking questions, especially when we think about work and our organizations. People are asking a lot of questions about, well, what remains? Like what do we see? We got new behaviors. Suddenly a whole bunch of us were working from home. And if we couldn't work from home, then we lost our work. So what is that going to look like? And so I have a framing for that. I call it the Great Reset. I think we're going through sort of three phases. Not the phases so much of what the lockdown itself is, but instead sort of three phases as to how we react. And I think I'm always, I would say, more like I'm not an optimist, more of a possibilist. I'm more of like, there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of things that I think we can hang on to, new things we can create together. And I think Land of the Long White Cloud is a good example of a country where there's a lot of discussion, a lot of thinking about what will sort of this new world look like and what will the different phases of it be. But I'm reasonably hopeful that I think a lot of different countries and economies have gotten some lessons here that they'll be able to take away. That doesn't mean it will be easy. It's going to be very, very hard for a number of economies, including America. But I believe there are some really tremendous new opportunities that are coming out of this as well.
So what are the three phases that you touched on that we need to go through?
So every country has been different in its response to the pandemic, and every country had an existing set of, think of them as rules, think of them as guidelines, think of them behaviors for their societies and for their markets, right? And so there are some countries that were very market-based, that is, let business sort of decide how you respond, and other countries that were more sort of civil society-based. They already had rules in place as to whether businesses could lay off lots of people, or whether or not there was going to be immediate financial support for people who suddenly lost their businesses or lost their livelihoods. And so think of those as sort of existing assets. And so some countries already had a lot of the right things in place that would allow them not to just be as resilient as possible, but to be able to adapt pretty quickly and to reduce the impact. But for every country, I sort of think of three phases. There's this sort of initial phase one, where we're all just trying to survive. Suddenly we've locked down and we're all just trying to get through it. Then there's a phase two so we've fallen off the cliff in phase one, and then we're sort of riffling along the bottom in phase two, and having different stages that we're turning the lights on or not, and in different cities and so on. And in some cases, like countries like New Zealand, it's a little bit easier in that second phase because, the statistics, New Zealand, a little over 4.5 million people, 1.5 million of them in Auckland, the rest distributed around a pretty good sized country. And so you've got just one big city where there's really high density. But in places like China or in the US, we've got lots of big cities and lots of density. And so that creates a lot of challenges, because you might have some hotspot here and then it gets better, and then there's a hotspot over here, but then there's a hotspot there again. So phase two is this sort of, they call revive. It's how do you get your economy back, moving again. And then phase three is where you're really hopefully putting the pieces together and we can build the next global growth period. But that's where we have the opportunity to thrive. That's where we can design new rules. And so, for instance, what New Zealand and Australia are talking about in terms of having sort of the collective bubble in phase two, well, we can't open it up to everybody to come into our countries. Right now, we're not going to let there be lots of business travel, but we're going to have a collaborative regional approach where we're going to make it a lot easier for our citizens to move back and forth and really make sure that the commerce between us goes well. We're seeing that in states in the US. There are regions where the governors of our states have all sort of banded together and said, let's try to have some common rules so we can start to get some of the activity going between us as well. And so phase 2, or the second stage, the sort of revive phase, is messy. It's going to vary by country. It's going to vary by location. Different businesses will be allowed to start up and other businesses won't. We're going to figure out a whole bunch of new normals, like concerts and conferences and restaurants. We're going to figure out what those rules are that actually protect us from the virus. And then eventually, phase 3 probably won't really kick in until we have a vaccine, and actually a pretty reliable vaccine that solves it for a lot of people, and hopefully isn't just seasonal, but is actually gives immunity for a long period of time.
Yeah, right. That leads quite nicely into what excites you the most about a post-COVID world.
So I don't know when that world is. I'm hopeful it's as soon as possible, but let's say it's within 2 years. So let's say phase 2 lasts for 2 years. What I believe, there's a number of things that I think we're going to gain in new behaviors, right? So when I do lectures about this, I show a picture of a horrible commute during rush hour, and I show a picture of a massive office that's a huge cubicle farm. And I asked the question at the bottom of the screen, tell me why this was ever a good idea. These are not things really that humans are best optimized to do. We're not really optimized to spend hours in a car going from point A to point B every single day with a mass of other humans doing the same thing. We're not really optimized to be in an office situation where we're all clumped together. And now there are wonderful things that can come from that. Very spontaneous interactions, lots of creativity, lots of water cooler conversations, lots of random chances to bump into other people. But it's think of it as sort of a plus and minus on the ledger. And for some people, it's a lot of minuses. If you live in a downtown area, you're near your office, you can walk there. There's plenty of restaurants and wonderful things to do nearby. There's probably a lot on the plus side of the ledger. But if you live in a suburban area and you've got to commute 2 hours each way, and you've got to work at a cruddy job, and with a ton of other people all pushing paper around, it's probably not the best approach. And so I hope that we're going to retain a number of things. We're going to find telemedicine is an extraordinarily efficient way to help a whole bunch of people to get information about their bodies or their minds very quickly and very efficiently without having to stop going to their business or their office or their place of work, go down to a doctor, have a 5-minute examination, and then go home with a couple of aspirin. I hope that instead, things like telemedicine will actually provide much wider access to services. And there's tons of other services that I hope we'll be doing by video as well, because they're just more efficient. I believe that we're going to have more distributed workers. I mean, there's no reason why somebody should have to, if somebody is living outside of Wellington and has to drive a long ways and has to commute in every single day to get to their office, that they shouldn't be able to stay home most of the time, or maybe even go to a local coffee shop or library where there are others that they could be working with, but not having to go into that office every day. I think there's lots of things like that we can gain if we learn how to work differently. Unfortunately, we have to retrain our managers. We've got to have new ways of leaders of companies thinking. Government has to think differently. All those things are possible. They're just not guaranteed.
Do you think they're probable?
Sure, absolutely. They're already happening. The CEOs of half a dozen of the world's largest corporations have already said, I don't think we're likely to have a big corporate headquarters anymore. I don't think we're going to be forcing everybody to all sort of bunch together as often as we did. We're finding that more companies are realizing that if you hire some of those people that are in remote areas and let them stay there, you know how expensive living is in Auckland or in Wellington. And so if you can live in a more rural area, then you actually get everything. You get a cheaper house, you get a better lifestyle, you lose the direct contact with your mates, but hey, why not go in, a couple times a month, or, have smaller gatherings of people that work for the same organization nearby, but not force everybody to keep coming into the same offices. And I think that's very likely. It depends upon the company, it depends upon the country, it depends upon a whole bunch of the factors. I think that's likely. And the other thing I think is likely is we'll just travel less for business for a while, at least for a while. Imagine that, as I do, that you're planning a 5-city tour. I was supposed to be, right now, I was supposed to have just been in Lisbon. I was supposed to be in Barcelona for a week, and I was supposed to be in Ethiopia lecturing at a conference. So now imagine you've got 5 or 6 different cities on your itinerary, and suddenly 2 of them are hotspots. Well, there's going to be an app for that. You'll be able to decide, wait, can I go there if I suddenly have to be locked away for 2 weeks, or maybe I have to change my entire itinerary, and now I'm going to become a virtual lecturer at that conference. I'm going to do it by video. And so all those things are very likely, at least for the near term. It's very likely we'll see much fewer people gathering together in offices. Those offices where people do gather together, there are going to be lots of countries where they're going to have to be socially distanced for a good period of time. So that means, a third to a quarter of the same number of people can be there anyway. And we're going to find business travel is going to change pretty dramatically.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was listening to another podcast actually, and they were saying how there's been all this remote infrastructure that's flooded into these big companies and corporates, and they've had to go remote and change all their systems. And now they're more agile than they had been before, because they've, I suppose, got a little bit more speed because everything's been flattened. They can get in touch with people that they need to. The downside is you can't get that human-to-human interaction and read body language as well. But that the thinking in that podcast was that there's more ability for them to move quicker because they can reach people just like that on a moment's notice. What's your thoughts? So now they've got more agility, and also they've got the resource that they had before. What do you think? So
we've been talking about companies becoming more digital for quite some time.
Yeah,
I was the editorial director of a half a dozen technology magazines in the 1990s. So I'm a recovering journalist, and we were talking about this in literally this whole using technology more sort of thing back in the 80s. And so we've known that if you use a bunch of these technologies, you can become a more nimble company. You can have faster communications between people. You can potentially find new problems for your customers to solve and go solve them. So those are all potentials. Now, with the Great Reset, and especially phase 1, we're in react mode. Like, we're just trying to survive. So I wouldn't say many people are really doing it as well as they could. What they've done is they've just gotten a taste of how it can be done. It's the same thing, let's say education. There's a huge impact on educators and on learners nowadays. And I've been writing and lecturing about what I call the unbundling of higher education for over 10 years. But the teachers that are being suddenly forced to do distance learning, they were never trained to do it in most cases. They're just trying to figure out how to adapt their curriculum. Their students are just trying to figure out what is this new normal and how do I interact and how do I stay connected with my mates and all the so it's just a react mode sort of process. So yes, all those things are great. It's really in that phase 2 where we're sort of reviving. Like now we have to figure out the best ways to do these things. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of other things that we could be doing, leveraging next generation technologies. We can be helping people to be able to redesign the kinds of work that they do. We can be training managers to think completely differently about how they guide the work of people. All of those are tremendous opportunities. But without doing those things, just using the technology, just doing video calls, just using Slack to communicate, they're useful. but they're not going to make companies by themselves significantly more nimble.
Yeah, it's interesting the point you brought up about education, because I'm currently a student actually, and we've seen in the university that there's we've had to go remote this semester, and at the end of semester we've got exams, and we still haven't been told how they'll work, how they'll function. So some interesting points you brought up there. What do you think about the skill set that we'll need of tomorrow? How can people upskill themselves so that they better prepare themselves for the future?
So I'll just be picky about wording, because sometimes the labels that we use matter. I don't use words like upskill and reskill, because they kind of sound like the industrial process that we want to leave behind. Those cubicle farms and the way we think of how we work in many cases in offices, we actually inherited that process from factories and the industrial era. And I think we kind of need to leave those kinds of things behind. So nothing wrong with the word training. But when we talk about the word, about skills, so there's actually two very, very different kinds. There's the bodies of information. So when you go to school, when you go to college, you're often gathering a bunch of information in a field or in an arena. And we've often called those rooted or work content skills. It's information that isn't very usable in different places, right? So if you're taught to be a brain surgeon, it doesn't help you to be a car mechanic, or vice versa, hopefully. And so that's one kind of skill. And we often call those hard skills, which is a horrible label. But knowledge is a good, bodies of knowledge, information. And then there's this completely other set of skills that are usable in a range of different situations. When you were a kid and you were 5 years old and it's your bedtime and you're trying to convince your parents to let you stay up, and they do, then suddenly you've learned a new skill. You're good at convincing. You're good at persuading. You might become a salesperson. You might become a business development person. You might become work for the government. Okay, well, maybe, you don't want to become a politician. Well, maybe you do want to become a politician if you're really good at it. But the basic premise is you have these transferable skills usable in a range of different situations. You're probably going to be good at persuading in many other different situations throughout your life. Well, what's happened in school is we have, again, industrial era processes. We've over-indexed on the bodies of information, these knowledges that we're trying to stick in your head. Well, in the past, where were knowledges? They were on the shelves, books in the shelves of the libraries at schools, and they're in the heads of teachers. Where is the information of the world today? It's in these digital distraction machines that we all carry around. And so bodies of information are much easier and faster to gather nowadays. Now, that doesn't mean I want my brain surgeon to just look at a YouTube video and walk in and operate on me, but there are lots of things that we can learn much more just in time and just in context, like just before I need to use it or while I need to use it. And I'm solving problems while I'm learning how to solve those problems. And so that means that the shelf life of information is shortening. It means that we're likely to not have as many 4-year degrees in the future. As somebody who never actually went to college, I have no moral standing here, but we're probably going to have fewer 4-year degrees. And we're going to have to focus much more on these transferable skills. So when I talk about 4, I talk about we all need to become problem solvers, because that's why people pay us and that's why we pay others, who are adaptive because the world is going to constantly change. We're creative because that's what keeps us ahead of robots and software. And we do it with empathy. We have to constantly be connecting with whether it's a customer or a problem of the world. So problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And I call that PACE. But the basic premise is those are skills that are usable in almost any situation. And so that's where we're going to have to focus our efforts, is we're going to have to teach workers, we're going to have to teach kids, we're going to have to teach retiring adults all to learn PACE, because it's what's going to allow us to be able to continue to solve the problems of tomorrow.
For sure. Do you think those PACE skills or the PACE method is, I guess they're more natural to some people than others? It's this nature versus nurture thing. There'll be some winners and some losers with that way of thinking. How do you teach something like that?
So first of all, I don't. The old joke is there's two kinds of people: those who group everybody into two kinds of people and those that don't.
Yeah.
I don't think of there as being winners and losers.
Yeah.
I think instead there are people that are optimized. That is, they learned these skills already. And there are others who have not yet really learned them, and who, unfortunately, because of a variety of different reasons, whether how they were grown up or what, some of the natural ways that they think, they're not really as prepared, right? So if your listeners want one of the books that helps a lot in understanding sort of the range of mindset, it's called Mindset, a book by a woman named Carol Dweck. And she says, well, there's sort of this fixed mindset, which is that you kind of like things to be the same every day. And there's a growth mindset, which is, oh, no, you're constantly changing and learning new things. And that's a spectrum. None of us has an entirely fixed mindset. None of us has an entirely growth mindset. It's sort of, a mix of different things. But people who really like and rely on the same things over and over again will simply have a harder time in a world of constant change. If you really loved your job working at the grocery counter, and then suddenly the grocery shut down because of the pandemic, or a restaurant, or a government office, or anything that put your job at risk, then suddenly you have to go find new work. Well, that's really hard if you've got a fixed mindset, if you don't think of yourself as being a constantly changing and growing person. And so that's where I think the opportunity is we actually can help people to be able to learn those skills. They're totally trainable. It starts with mindset, and then it starts with this, and then you need the skill set. But it's totally doable. It's just those who have gotten used to doing the same thing over and over again probably need a little more help dealing with it.
Yeah, I'm not too savvy on what the education system is like in the US, but there's probably a few improvements that could be made in New Zealand, and it might be useful for the US as well. What do you think the key changes to the normal education system need to be in order to reach those outcomes?
So I've had the pleasure of lecturing literally everywhere from Auckland University of Technology down to University of Dunedin, and so first off, amazing institutions and really just wonderful administrators, instructors, and students. So what is the challenge is that the model, and this varies tremendously by country, but there are certain characteristics that are similar between the US and New Zealand. What ends up happening is colleges have sort of built themselves on a model. And the model is, and this is for your colleges, the model is that you get students that commit. They're going to pay a certain amount of money. They're going to go through a sequenced curriculum with a lot of different pieces to it. And those are sort of building blocks. The building blocks are all sanctioned by the university as a group. And then at the end of that experience, assuming they paid all their fees and graduated from all their courses, they get a degree. And then the assumption is that that degree is going to be useful to a future employer. They're going to say, "Oh, you have an archaeology degree or an MBA, or I believe that because you gathered that information and the college said you gathered that information and you developed these skills, that you're going to be good at it in my company." Now, all of those are open for question. It's a question why it needs to be 4 years. So it's marvelous if a student or a student's family or a federal government has enough money to be able to support the student to be there for 4 years, but a lot of families will not. It's challenging if, in addition, the student has to take on loans. Here in the United States, the loans add up to $1.4 trillion.
Holy moly.
That's a massive amount of money. And so that's how many outstanding student loans there are now. And so the student then takes on all the risk, and the college took on very, very little. It's not clear why it needed to be 4 years. Why is it the same for an archaeology degree, a business degree? There's all these different fields where it's exactly the same amount of time, but different fields take different time to learn. So it's actually, it matches the business model of the school. And then there's an accrediting agency, and most countries have them, that says, oh, well, you're a university, and I believe that you're doing these things. But in the United States, we have to lock down our curriculum in our universities for 2 years. We can't change them because the accrediting agencies all have to approve them. So if you add all that up, then you say, well, we're probably moving into a new era where certain things are going to change. Employers are not going to demand degrees as much as they used to, depends upon the field. There's going to be more opportunities to learn certificates or to get badges or different parts of the learning that will then roll up to something that the employer will believe is, validates their experience. So for instance, coding camps. You can go to a code camp for as short as 6 months and then start shipping product with a startup or with a company because you've learned enough of that skill set. And if you demonstrate good skill at it, then you're going to get hired. And so we need to change the model that allows students to gather the information that's appropriate for that field.
And plus, there's all these online courses that.
This is the opportunity and the challenge. Yes, you're absolutely right. So online courses, the data is very, very clear. The average student, and there are no average students as far as I'm concerned, but the common student works best with a combination of in-person and online. In-person is cohort-based. It's working on projects. It's collaborating with your mates. It's having access to mentors, which we today call teachers, but tomorrow hopefully we'll call guides or something else. And it's very focused, intensive periods of learning. And then online is a chance to gather a whole bunch of information, to listen to that information over and over again if you're having trouble tracking on it, to be able to practice things over and over again, because doing that in a classroom can be very difficult. And so it's pretty likely that schools will have to adjust to having a mix, and they're going to shorten the amount of time you're actually on the campus. That's pretty likely. And so that means a new business model. It means, we had to go through this with magazines and newspapers. In the United States, we lost half of all the people that were in that industry over 25 years. So it's pretty likely universities are going to go through a pretty big reset. They're going to be unbundled. They're going to change the product that they offer. They're going to become more lifelong learning. So you might actually get a subscription service from your university, so that every time you go through a career change, they're going to be there to help you. And all of these, every university, every college, every learning institution will have to experiment with these things because, yes, a lot of it's going to become more virtual, and a lot of it is going to be the same thing you can do with a magazine. You get a whole bunch of information online, and so that means that it's, the value, the cost of it goes down pretty significantly.
Yeah, I know the business model we need to change our thinking around universities, because a lot of income comes from international students in New Zealand, because the government subsidizes our degrees if you're a domestic student. So obviously that can't quite happen at the moment, but we'll see what happens down the line. Just shifting thinking slightly to those people who may have lost their job or they've been made redundant or through this coronavirus. You're an expert in all things careers. What's your advice if people need to completely change tact or go back into the workforce, but they don't really have a direction at the moment?
Yeah. So first off, I have just huge compassion for people here in the United States. What we will admit to is about 33 million people out of work. There's a lot more because we had an informal, we had a pretty significant informal economy around platforms with Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. We had a lot of precariousness of the work that existed. A lot of it was temporary or part-time. And so there's a lot more people that are looking for work than that. And so first off, my heart in any country around the world, my heart goes out to people who've lost their jobs. So there's a range of strategies that you've read Parachute, so you know a lot of the background, but there's a range of strategies, but I want to sort of distill it down for people. So, and separate it out. If you feel that you have the kind of training and preparation where you're going to be able to find work reasonably quickly, that is, there's still demand. So if you're a blockchain or an artificial intelligence programmer, you're going to find other work. It's out there, right? if you feel that there's a ton of people that are looking for the same kind of work and there's just less work, I call this a game of musical chairs with many fewer chairs, depending upon the country. Then there's strategies that we know that are pretty clear. First off, it's very, very important to know what your unique skills and experiences are. And so that's the what part is we call self-inventory. It's how can you do this, the exercises that help you gather information about your own skills, prioritize them based on what you love doing, and get a good sense of what you're good at and the kinds of problems that you most want to solve. Then there's the where. Okay, so now if I understand me, now I can look at the scenarios, the different places I could be doing that work. And then there's the mechanics, like the job search process and writing a resume and interviewing and those sorts of things. So what, where, and how. And my father would often call these the cart, the horse, and the road. The cart is you, the horse is pulling, it's where you could use those skills, and then the road is how you get there. Now, what happens when there's a lot of competition is the really hard part is in the how. It's in the mechanics. It's because nobody taught us how to do this. Nobody taught us how to understand our own skills. Nobody taught us how to do the sort of design thinking about the different kinds of scenarios, different kinds of jobs we could do that those skills would allow us to do. And then nobody taught us the mechanics. In the mechanics, there is a very, very simple approach, and that is it's just treating it like a job itself. So all the statistics, all the data is very clear. If you spend 5 minutes a day just checking, online listings for jobs and then go off and do other things, it's pretty unlikely you're going to find work. It might work for you, but for most people, they say, nah, that doesn't do it. So first off, it's treating it like a job. That is putting hours a day into doing the search. Secondly, it's using a range of different techniques. Don't just check online. Go to LinkedIn and ping other people and ask to do informational interviews with them. And then go talk to those people and do informational interviews with them. And just do this process of networking and gathering as much information you can about different businesses and different kinds of work that you could do and where you might do it. It's being open to project work, not necessarily getting a job immediately, but range of different strategies and approaches to trying to find that work. That's how we find people find work the most quickly.
Excellent. I guess because we're running low on time, I'll shift slightly to how can we as a society work on things that will benefit the most amount of people, and we can come out of this relatively unscathed with. I know you think a lot about the digital work economy and how the world's changing on a whole, but this has been a bit of a plot twist no one was expecting, and it came out of the blue. How can we make the most possible good out of a seemingly bad situation?
No, it's an excellent question. So first off, when I talk about the future of work, I sort of break it down into sort of 4 domains. Individuals, each of us, needing to find or create work. Organizations, organizations need talented people always. Communities, what's going on in the world around you, and how's your community work, pulling together. And then countries. So individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. And so there is a role for everybody in building the world that we most want to see. So, but I'll start off at the sort of the country level and I'll work my way down. So nationally, there are countries that have had really big impact by the virus, but are probably going to recover much more quickly. The Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Germany, to some extent the UK, even in Russia, the rules were, as much as possible, if you had a job, your company needed to keep paying you. So it's going to be a lot easier to just go back to your old job than if you suddenly were laid off and with no prospects of ever returning. And so at the country level, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for New Zealand. It's an opportunity for Australia. It's an opportunity for every country to think about what is the society that you want and the economy that you want, and they have a lot of overlap. So if you want an inclusive society, one where everybody has access to opportunity, then you've got to do some things where you are pulling the levers of the economy to ensure that that happens. Because the peculiar form of capitalism that we practice in the Western world is not a guarantee. There's no guarantee of work. There's no guarantee that you're going to continue, your business is going to be able to continue. And that's perfectly understandable. However, you can make decisions in countries as to what you think is most important and whether or not they should continue. For your communities, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for communities to pull together. In the rural U.S., we have lots of communities that literally have not recovered economically from the Great Recession. That was 12 years ago. And so we actually have the opportunity to figure out, how do you help those communities to thrive? And in some cases, it's as you can say as simple, but it's as important as having broadband networks for everybody. And it can be as next generation in thinking as changing your local college to become a hub of robotics and AI programming learning. I mean, there's lots of things that communities can do. When we visited Howrah and did an all-day workshop on the future of work for the iwi, for the teenagers of the iwi there, we talked a lot about what you can do to actually build the kind of environment where the kids can be sparked with all these possibilities for things that they might be able to do in the future. Organizations, companies need to hire differently. They need to hire much more inclusively. They need to think about this process of hiring people in remote areas and leaving them in place and how to make all of that work. And then for each of us as individuals, if we are dedicated to doing the kinds of work that we feel can have the greatest impact in the world, then it's going to be a better world. Well, there's tons of problems that need to be solved. We've seen just some of them. And some of the problems now that have been created by this virus, people losing their jobs, losing their companies, municipalities going bankrupt, these are all things that are going to be with us for quite some time, and especially in rural areas. And so that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to pull together and to build that much more positive future.
Awesome. We're just hitting the end of this podcast. What have you got any last closing comments, thoughts that you want to put out to the people who may be seeing this, and what's, I guess, just to sum up everything we've talked about?
So I just want to the one question that people ask me a lot that I think I found useful just to talk about is how do people lead through this period? And you can be a leader simply by example in your family, or you can be a leader running a large corporation or a government agency or anything in between, right? And so how do you lead? Well, it talks about three things. So it's important to have competence, compassion, and courage. And it's especially important in a period like this where we're going through such a big reset. Competence, just keep on trying to be as good at the things that you do as you possibly can. Be fascinated by stuff, stay curious, but keep on trying to improve your skill set. Compassion, because one of the things we've found by having to shelter in place is that we literally see into the homes of half the people on the planet all going through the same experience. So hopefully one of the things that remains is that we all retain much better personal connections with each other. When in the history of the world were you able to actually directly connect with somebody visually like this, half a world away? But courage, because what you saw with the New Zealand government and Prime Minister Ardern was a set of courageous decisions early on that were heavily criticized. And this always happens with courageous leaders, is they see a challenge, they point a direction, they stay consistent and on task for that goal, and they try to sort of include other people, but sort of blot out the naysayers and just keep moving forward. And we've seen this in country after country. And in many cases, as you've probably seen in the news, they were female leaders. And so to lead, competence, compassion, and courage, people won't always agree this is the right decision. They don't always agree that taking care of your elderly, that watching out for those that are the least advantaged matters. But it does matter. It matters tremendously. And this is an opportunity for all of us, is to have the courage to build that much more inclusive future.
Thank you so much, Gary, for everything, for jumping on today, your thoughts, because I met you a few years ago at one of your talks and loved what you had to say, and you hadn't heard from me for a while, and then I emailed you out of the blue, and you instantly jumped at the opportunity to come on and have a chat. So thank you so much. If people want to find you, what's the best avenue to do that?
I tend to get pinged a lot on LinkedIn. I've got, if any of this stuff is interesting to you, I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning on everything from a learning mindset to building adaptive employees. Please follow me on LinkedIn. And then I've got a whole bunch of links to things on my site, gbolles.com. But I put all those pointers on LinkedIn. That's where the world tends to see me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate
you're a thought leader and an incredible mind. And I just thank you for your time today. It's awesome.
I'm going to be in country at the end of the year. So we'll see if that comes together.
Yeah. If that can, love to catch up.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much.
Be safe.
Appreciate it. See you later. Gary Bolles, everyone. Smart guy. Future of work. He knows a lot about this area, and incredible to have him on the show. We've got a lineup of other speakers and industry experts coming on the show later in the week. So tune in tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. I'll be back. Ask questions, you get answers. Easy as that. All right, everyone. That's all for today. Peace.